For 300 years, the Voratheians had owned the stars. This wasn't a boast, it was a fact, known by every species in the galaxy. Their empire spanned 2,000 star systems, backed by tens of thousands of warships. When the Voratheians wanted something, they simply took it. When they issued a command, everyone obeyed. That's just how things were. The Galactic Council, a grand assembly on a station floating in the black between worlds, was supposed to be a place of diplomacy. But with representatives from 47 species gathered, everyone knew the truth. The council was just a stage to make Voratheian demands sound like polite requests. They would argue, they would debate, but when the time came to vote, the outcome was always the same. Any world that stepped out of line found itself choked by sanctions, blockades, or much, much worse. The Voratheian delegate, High Chancellor Vexith, was an imposing figure. His people were bipedal, but their skin was thick and gray like granite. Their eyes held a soft, menacing red glow, and their voices rumbled like a storm on the horizon. Vexith's chair was the largest in the chamber, placed on a dais above everyone else. It wasn't protocol, but no one was brave enough to complain. And on this day, Vexith had called them all for a special announcement. The other delegates sat quietly in their seats, a nervous energy filling the air. Some whispered amongst themselves, while others just stared ahead, their faces a mask of resignation. They all had a sinking feeling they knew what this was about. The Voratheians had found a new prize. "Honorable members of the council," Vexith's voice boomed, needing no microphone. "The Empire has made a discovery, one that will benefit every species under our protection. Our scouts have charted a new world in the galaxy's outer rim. Our systems label it Sol 3, but its primitive natives have a different name for it: Earth." The delegates shifted, leaning forward just a little. A new world meant new resources, new labor, and new riches flowing straight into the Empire's coffers. Of course, if a species was particularly obedient, they might get a few scraps. "Our initial scans," Vexith continued, "show a planet rich in minerals and teeming with life, and more importantly, it's home to a self-proclaimed intelligent species they call humans. Our intelligence division has just completed its assessment, and frankly, the results are hilarious." He gestured, and a giant hologram flared to life in the middle of the room. It showed a beautiful blue and green planet, swirling with clouds, orbiting a bright yellow sun. Then, the view zoomed in, revealing cities, cars, and the people themselves. "As you can see," Vexith said, a smirk playing on his lips, "the humans are laughably primitive. They've only just started to tiptoe off their own world. Their fastest ships still use chemical combustion for power." Chemical combustion? It's like using firewood to cross an ocean. They think landing a few of their own on their moon is some kind of monumental achievement. A few chuckles rippled through the delegates. Chemical rockets were ancient history, the kind of tech you'd find in a museum, not on a starship. It was like finding a lost tribe still sharpening rocks. "And get this," Vexith went on, "the humans don't even have a single world government. They're split into nearly 200 different factions, and most of them are busy fighting each other over dirt, resources, and silly ideas. Their most powerful weapons are primitive atom splitters, nuclear bombs. They might be good for blowing each other up, I suppose, but they're completely useless against modern energy shields." More images flashed across the hologram, bustling human cities, tiny, fragile-looking spaceships. To the star-faring races in the room, the humans looked like toddlers playing with toy blocks. "The Empire has decided," Vexith announced, "that Sol 3 and its system will be folded into our territory. The humans will be offered a chance to surrender and serve the Empire. If they decline, standard military action will be taken. Fleet Admiral Kreth has been assigned to command the 7th Subjugation Fleet for this task." A hologram of the Admiral materialized next to the image of Earth. Kreth was even more massive than Vexith, his armor crusted with metals from centuries of conquest. His red eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a sign of his genetically enhanced combat abilities. Kreth had personally brought 9 civilizations to heel. he'd never lost. The Seventh Fleet is comprised of 847 warships, Vexith stated plainly. This includes 6 dreadnoughts, 42 battleships, 150 cruisers, and all the necessary support craft. Now, standard procedure for a world that hasn't even discovered faster-than-light travel is usually 100 ships. However, Admiral Kreth requested the extra muscle to make a lasting impression. We want the humans to understand, instantly and without a doubt, that fighting back is not an option. The delegate from Thaxia, a small insect-like creature, tentatively raised a claw. High Chancellor, forgive me, but is such a massive fleet truly necessary for a species like this? It seems a bit much. Vexith's fiery gaze locked onto the Thaxian, who immediately lowered its arm. The size of the fleet isn't just about military need, delegate, Vexith growled. It's about sending a message to everyone. The Empire's power is limitless. Our resources are endless. We can spare nearly 1,000 warships for one primitive planet because we have tens of thousands more waiting. Let this be a lesson to all. The Thaxian delegate shrank back into its seat. The message was received loud and clear. The Voratheians could crush anyone through sheer numbers alone, even an enemy that posed zero threat. The operation will commence in 3 standard weeks, Vexith continued. The 7th Fleet is gathering at staging point Gamma. Admiral Kreth predicts the entire takeover will last less than one of Earth's planetary rotations. The humans will see our fleet darken their skies. They will hear our terms, and they will surrender. If they're stupid enough to fight, their entire military will be wiped from existence in a matter of hours. After that, we begin standard integration protocols. And every single being in that chamber knew what standard integration protocols meant. The humans would be disarmed. Their planet's resources would be stripped and taxed. Their people would become laborers for the Empire's grand projects. Their culture would be allowed to survive only if it didn't offend their new Voratheian masters. In 1 generation, Earth would be nothing more than another cog in the Imperial machine. Its people just another nameless, faceless workforce serving their overlords. This council session will remain open, Vexith declared. All member species will be granted live access to the 7th Fleet's mission feeds. The Admiral has generously agreed to broadcast the entire event so the galaxy can witness Voratheian efficiency firsthand. I expect every one of you to watch and to make sure your homeworlds are watching too. Let it be a reminder of our strength and the absolute foolishness of resistance. With that, Vexith turned and strode out of the chamber. The delegates sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then, one by one, they shuffled out, heading back to their quarters to deliver the news. In a quiet side corridor, the Thaxian delegate found the representative from Draxus, a furry, wolf-like species. "Do you think they have any clue?" the Thaxian whispered. "The humans, do they know what's coming?" The Draxian shook its massive head. How could they? They barely know for sure that anyone else is out here. For decades, they've been beaming radio waves into the darkness, just hoping for an answer. Well, an answer is coming, and it's the worst one imaginable. "I almost feel sorry for them," the Thaxian murmured. "Listening to their broadcasts, they sound so optimistic. They talk about peace, about different species working together for a common good." "Then they are fools," the Draxian replied, though a sad tone laced its voice. "The galaxy isn't a cooperative, it's a food chain. The Voratheians are at the top, and the rest of us are below. That's the cold, hard truth. The humans are about to get a very painful lesson in reality." "Well, at least they might survive," the Thaxian offered. "The Voratheians don't usually wipe out a species that gives up right away. If the humans are smart, they'll just surrender." "Maybe," the Draxian rumbled, "but I've studied their history. Humans are a stubborn bunch. They fight each other all the time, but they have this fierce, irrational pride. They might do something stupid. They might actually fight back." "Then they will be erased," the Thaxian said flatly. 847 Voratheian warships versus chemical rockets and atomic bombs. It wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be a pest extermination. The two delegates went their separate ways. All across the station, similar conversations were taking place. Some felt a flicker of pity for the humans. Most just felt relieved that the Empire's gaze was fixed on someone else. Some species felt a knot of anger tighten in their stomachs at the sheer unfairness of it all. But they knew better than to show it. Defying the Empire was a death sentence. Miles above, in a fortified command hub only the Vorathaean elite could enter, High Chancellor Vexith was in a holographic meeting with Admiral Kreth. Kreth's shimmering life-sized image dominated the room. Vexith gave his report. The Council has been notified. They'll be watching the operation, just as the law requires. A few of them mumbled about sympathy for the humans, but not a single one voted against the annexation. Of course they didn't, Kreth scoffed. They're terrified of us, and that's exactly how it should be. Did you go over my battle plans? I did. The fleet you've assembled seems to be more than enough. I signed off on your request for extra ships because your logic was sound, Vexith said. This whole operation needs to be a show of absolute crushing force. Let the entire galaxy watch and learn what happens to species who can't pull their own weight. Kreth nodded. The 7th Fleet will jump into the Sol system in precisely 3 weeks. We'll pop out of hyperspace right next to their 4th planet, a rock they call Mars. From there, we'll broadcast our standard ultimatum in all their major languages. I've looked into their communication tech. They have this primitive little thing called the Internet that connects their whole planet. We're going to hijack it and send our message to every single one of their devices at once. Vexith leaned forward. And what kind of response are you expecting? Total, absolute panic, Kreth said, a grin spreading across his face. Their governments will be tripping over themselves trying to contact us. It'll be chaos. They'll bicker and argue about what to do. Some of them will probably want to fight, but their military leaders will figure out pretty fast that they don't stand a chance. I give it 6 hours, maybe less, before they offer up a surrender. And if they don't? Vexith asked. If not, Kreth continued, we'll start taking out their military bases one by one. They'll fold after we flatten a few of them. And if they're still stubborn after that? Kreth's eyes seemed to glow with a dark energy. Then we'll start bombarding their biggest cities from orbit. Trust me, one vaporized city will be all it takes. They'll surrender on the spot. Humans are incredibly emotional. Our psych profiles show they'd never sacrifice their own people for a war they know they can't win. Excellent. Just remember, Admiral, Vexith warned, the whole galaxy is tuning in for this. Keep it clean, keep it fast, and make it absolutely terrifying. I want every species out there to see this and be reminded that the Empire is unbeatable. It will be done, High Chancellor, Kreth affirmed. The 7th Fleet will bring nothing but glory to the Empire. The humans? They'll be a tiny footnote in our long history. Just another backward species that learned its place is on its knees before Vorathaean might. The hologram fizzled out, leaving Vexith alone. He walked to a massive viewport and stared out at the endless sea of stars. Somewhere in that darkness, the human race was going about its day, completely oblivious that its entire future had just been decided. In 3 short weeks, everything they knew would be gone. Vexith didn't feel a shred of guilt. The galaxy was a simple place, really. The strong rule the weak. The smart control the simple. The Empire took what it wanted for one reason, because it could. It was just the law of the jungle, played out among the stars. The humans were about to get a crash course, and the rest of the galaxy would be taking notes, remembering why they never, ever questioned the Empire. 3 weeks. That was all the time Earth had left. The Vorathaean 7th Fleet tore through hyperspace, emerging into reality like a stain spreading across the cosmos. 847 warships blinked into existence near Mars, their dark hulls barely reflecting the distant sun. Every ship was a monster, designed for one purpose: war. Their smallest ships were the size of a human aircraft carrier. Their biggest dreadnoughts were over 5 kilometers long, covered in weapons that could shatter continents. On the bridge of the flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kreth watched the red disk of Mars swell on the main view screen as his armada fell into perfect formation. All around him, Vorathaean officers moved with crisp, practiced efficiency, a well-oiled machine coordinating a fleet of unimaginable power. The bridge itself was like a temple dedicated to conquest, with ceilings soaring 20 meters high and walls plastered with tactical data. "Fleet formation is complete, Admiral," the tactical officer announced. "All ships report green status, no issues from the hyperspace jump." "Scan the system," Kreth commanded. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know where every human ship, every satellite, and every outpost is. I want no surprises." The sensor officer's fingers flew across her console, pointing the fleet's powerful sensor arrays at the third planet from the sun. "Scanning now, Admiral. Initial pings show a bunch of artificial satellites orbiting their homeworld. Looks like primitive communication and weather stuff. We're also picking up chemical rocket launches from the surface. Seems like routine supply runs to a tiny space station. No military ships detected outside their planet's immediate orbit." Kreth nodded, a smug look on his face. This was exactly what their intelligence had predicted. The humans had barely dipped their toes into space, with a dinky little station and no real navy to speak of. They had no patrols, no early warning systems beyond those toy satellites. They were totally blind to any threat that came from beyond their own moon. "Open a channel to the Galactic Council," Kreth ordered. "Broadcast on all frequencies. Let them all witness this historic moment." Across the galaxy, on the Central Council Station, and on the home planets of 47 different species, screens flickered to life. Trillions of eyes were now watching the Vorathaean fleet as it hung menacingly in space. In the Grand Council chamber, delegates settled into their seats, ready to watch what they expected to be a swift and brutal takeover. "Channel is open, Admiral," the comms officer confirmed. "Attention, species of Earth," Kreth began, his voice booming as Vorathaean computers translated it into 17 human languages simultaneously. "I am Fleet Admiral Kreth of the Vorathaean Empire. Your world has been chosen for annexation. You will immediately stand down all military forces and prepare to receive our occupation teams. You have 6 hours to broadcast your unconditional surrender. Comply, and your species will be peacefully integrated into our glorious empire. We will protect you, we will govern you, and we will put you to work. But if you resist, we will bring total annihilation. You cannot win this fight. You cannot run. Your only choice is how you wish to survive. Comply and live. Resist and be erased. You have 6 hours." The message cut off. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the officers glanced at each other, waiting. Their intel suggested it would take at least an hour for the humans to even process this. They expected frantic broadcasts, confusion, maybe some begging for more time. The actual response came in 2 minutes. It was a single audio transmission, no video, from an entity called NORAD Combined Space Command. The voice was a human male, speaking English in a calm, almost bored tone. "Negative. Maintain your current position beyond lunar orbit, or you will be engaged. This is your only warning. NORAD out." For a solid 10 seconds, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was dead silent. Officers stared at each other, utterly bewildered. Then, Admiral Kreth started to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that filled the entire command center. "Did you all hear that?" he boomed, gesturing to his crew. "They just threatened us. A species that still uses chemical rockets just threatened the Vorathaean Empire. They warned us." He laughed again, louder this time. "I have brought 9 civilizations to heal. I have turned entire worlds to glass. And these primitives think they can engage us?" Across the galaxy, the reaction was stunned silence. In the council chamber, delegates fidgeted. The Thaxian ambassador leaned over to his Draxian neighbor. "They rejected the ultimatum. In 2 minutes. They didn't even talk about it." "They're fools," the Draxian whispered back, "where they have absolutely no idea what they're up against." On the Eternal Dominion, Kreth's laughter died, replaced by a cold fury. "Communications," he snapped. "Send a message back to Earth. Tell them they just made the biggest mistake in their short, pathetic history. Tell them we are advancing on their position, and we will now accept nothing less than total, unconditional surrender. Anything else will result in their immediate extinction." "Yes, Admiral," the officer started, but Kreth cut her off. "Actually, scratch that. No more messages. Words are wasted on these creatures. All ships advance on Earth. Bombardment formation. Let's teach these humans what defiance truly costs." The colossal fleet began to move as one. 847 warships surged toward the little blue planet, a perfect, disciplined wall of death. The massive dreadnoughts held the center, shielded by layers of battleships and cruisers, with smaller destroyers forming a protective screen. It was the textbook formation for crushing an inferior enemy. "Time to Earth orbit?" Kreth demanded. "At our current speed, 43 minutes, Admiral." "Excellent," he said. "Keep the sensors on high alert. If these humans are dumb enough to launch one of their little rockets at us, I want to know about it." "Admiral!" The sensor officer's voice was suddenly sharp with alarm. "Multiple contacts. Hundreds, no, thousands of new signatures are appearing all over the system." "What?" Kreth stormed over to the sensor station. "Where did they come from? Did they use FTL drives? That's impossible. They don't have that technology." "No hyperspace signatures detected, Admiral," the officer stammered, her eyes wide. "They were already here. They were hiding. They're dropping some kind of stealth field." "Sir, they were everywhere, all around us, hiding in the asteroid belt, lurking near the outer planets, even tucked into Mars's own orbit. We were completely boxed in, and we never even saw it coming." On the main view screen, the tactical display was exploding with new information. Red icons blinked into existence on the map. First dozens, then hundreds. Every single one represented a ship of unknown design, arranged throughout our solar system in what could only be a meticulously planned ambush. Across the galaxy, other species watched in stunned silence. The Thaxian delegate shot up from his chair. "How is this possible? Our intelligence said they had no deep space fleet." Kree just stared, his mind racing. Analysis. What kind of ships are we looking at? What can they do? "Unknown, Admiral. They're not in any of our databases. Their energy readings don't match any known propulsion system. It looks like some kind of reaction drive, but the efficiency is off the charts, way beyond what a pre-faster-than-light species should be capable of. They're running cold, sir, almost no heat emissions. That's how they slipped past our long-range scans." "A head count now," Kay demanded. "We're still counting, sir. The current estimate is 437 contacts. No, wait, 612. More are dropping their stealth fields as we speak." 600 ships against 800 of their own. The odds were still in their favor, but this was a far cry from what intelligence had led them to expect. These humans weren't some primitive race stumbling into their first galactic encounter. They had been waiting for this. They had been preparing. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from Earth," the comms officer announced. "Put it on," Kree commanded. The same cold, robotic voice they'd heard from NORAD echoed through the bridge. "Vorathion Fleet, you are instructed to hold your position outside lunar orbit. You have crossed into our defensive perimeter. You will now withdraw to a position beyond the orbit of Mars, or you will be fired upon. You have 60 seconds to comply." Kree's hands balled into fists. "Retreat? They have the audacity to order us to retreat? Lock all weapons on the nearest human ship. All vessels on my command prepare to open fire. We will teach these primitives what happens when you threaten the Empire." "Admiral, I urge you to be cautious," the tactical officer said, choosing his words with care. "We have no idea what they're capable of. Perhaps we should—" "Enough!" Kree bellowed. "We are the Vorathian Empire. We do not show caution to primitives. We do not run from our inferiors. All ships target the human fleet and fire at will." The Vorathian fleet unleashed hell. A storm of energy weapons lit up the darkness of space, with thousands of plasma bolts screaming toward the human ships. It was a display of overwhelming force, the kind that could vaporize fleets, shatter shields, and turn armor to slag. But the human ships just moved. They didn't maneuver like normal ships, with slow, graceful turns and gradual acceleration. They moved in sudden, violent bursts, their reaction drives firing in sharp, unpredictable pulses. The Vorathian targeting systems, built to track conventional flight paths, simply couldn't lock on. 90% of their shots sailed harmlessly into the void, The few that did find their mark slammed into the human ships, where their shields flared and absorbed the impact. But they weren't energy shields like the Vorathayans used. It was something else. A blade of armor that boiled away under the plasma fire, sacrificing its outer layers to keep the ship intact. It was a crude, almost barbaric solution, but it was working. "They're breaking formation, sir," the tactical officer reported. "Adopting erratic flight patterns. Our targeting computers can't get a lock." And then the humans fired back. The first shot came from a ship that had been hiding in the shadow of Mars. It wasn't a laser or a plasma bolt. It was something much simpler and infinitely more terrifying. It was a solid chunk of metal launched by electromagnetic rails at 30% of the speed of light. A kinetic kill vehicle, just a dense slug moving at a relativistic velocity. It slammed into the lead dreadnought, the Glorious Conquest, hitting it dead center. The shields, designed to deflect energy, offered zero resistance to a solid object moving that fast. The projectile ripped through the shields as if they weren't there. It tore through 2 kilometers of armor plating, shredded internal decks, and pierced the reactor core at the very heart of the ship. The Glorious Conquest simply came apart. Its reactor, breached and unstable, detonated in a brilliant flash of light that was visible from Earth. 5,000 Vorathayan crew members vanished in an instant. The resulting shockwave crippled 2 nearby cruisers. On the council station, the delegates could only stare at their screens in abject horror. The Draxian delegate whispered, "They just killed a dreadnought with 1 shot. How?" The humans didn't give them time to think. More kinetic weapons fired from hidden positions all over the system. These slugs were cheap, simple metal, but at those speeds, they were unstoppable. Vorathayan shields were useless. Vorathayan armor was tissue paper. Ships that had brought entire civilizations to their knees were being torn apart by weapons that the galaxy would have considered laughably primitive. "Evasive maneuvers!" Kree screamed. "All ships, break formation and scatter! We have to dodge those things!" But the humans had planned for this too. As the Vorathayan fleet broke apart in panic, the human ships surged forward, closing the gap. And as they got closer, they revealed a whole new arsenal of weapons. Missiles that could change direction in ways that defied physics. Warheads tipped with nuclear payloads that detonated against Vorathayan hulls. Lasers powered by contained nuclear blasts that sliced through armor in close-quarters combat. "They're everywhere!" the sensor officer yelled. "Sir, they're using the wreckage of our own ships for cover. They're hiding in the debris fields and ambushing us." Kree watched in dawning terror as his magnificent fleet was systematically dismantled. The humans fought like no one he had ever seen before. There was no honor, no disciplined formations, no tactics he could predict. They struck from impossible angles, used decoys and electronic warfare to sow chaos, and even sacrificed their own smaller ships to draw fire while their heavy hitters lined up kill shots. "Order a retreat," Kree finally choked out. "All ships fall back to Mars orbit. We have to regroup and... Sir, we're detecting hyperspace interference. The humans are jamming our FTL drives." "What? That's impossible. They shouldn't have that kind of technology." "Be that as it may, sir, we are unable to jump. Any ship that tries gets nothing but critical error codes." And in that moment, Kree finally understood. The humans had been listening. They had studied Vorathayan technology, analyzed every broadcast, and prepared weapons designed specifically to exploit every single one of their weaknesses. They were trapped in a system with an enemy they had dismissed as helpless prey. The battle unfolded with a horrifying, brutal efficiency. Every species in the galaxy watched, their entire understanding of humanity shattering with each passing minute. Timestamp 0. The Vorathayan fleet, now a confused and panicked mob, tried desperately to form a new battle line. Admiral Kree's orders blasted across every channel, demanding his ships get back into standard defensive patterns. But standard tactics were useless here. The humans had been studying Vorathayan doctrine for 40 years. They had analyzed every battle the Empire had ever made public. They knew what Cray was going to do before he even thought of it. Human ships converged from every direction. Ships that had laid dormant in the asteroid belt for years fired up their drives and raced inward. Platforms that had been disguised as dead satellites near Jupiter revealed themselves as massive weapon emplacements. Ships that had been buried under the ice of Saturn's rings shed their camouflage and joined the attack. The humans had turned their entire home system into one giant deadly trap, and the Voratheians had flown right into its jaws. Timestamp 247. The Voratheian battleship Pride of Empire finally scored a kill, destroying a human frigate with a concentrated blast of plasma. The small ship broke apart, its crew of 200 lost as their vessel vented into space. For just a second, Cray felt a surge of hope. They could still win this. They had the superior numbers, the superior firepower. The humans were just relying on surprise. Once the Voratheians could adapt, victory was certain. And then, 6 human destroyers emerged from behind the fresh wreckage of the frigate. The human ship had been bait, deliberately sent in to draw their fire, to force the Empire's ships to reveal their positions. The second the Pride of Empire opened up, human targeting computers had locked onto its exact coordinates. The 6 destroyers fired as one. Not with energy blasts or kinetic slugs, but with missiles, dozens of them from each ship. Over 100 warheads converged on a single point. The Pride of Empire's defense systems shot down as many as they could, but it wasn't nearly enough. Nuclear fire blossomed across the battleship's hull, overloading its shields and cracking its armor wide open. The last missile found its way deep inside to the ship's reactor core. The Pride of Empire died in a silent, brilliant inferno, taking its entire escort of 4 cruisers with it. The shockwave from the battleship's end caught the smaller vessels, sending them tumbling through space as ruptured, lifeless hulks. Across the galaxy, the species that had been crushed under the Voratheians' boot watched with a strange mix of terror and grim satisfaction. The Taxian delegate gripped the arms of his chair with all 4 hands, his eyes glued to the screen. The Draxian next to him was shaking, though whether from fear or excitement, it was impossible to tell. They're fighting with tactics we've never even dreamed of. The Draxian observer couldn't believe his eyes. How are they doing that? He murmured. Every single ship is moving on its own, yet they're all in perfect sync. There's no flagship calling the shots, no single command vessel to take out. It's impossible. But it wasn't. What the aliens saw as chaos was actually a symphony of destruction. Every human ship, weapon, and sensor in the solar system was linked into one massive thinking network. They saw with a million eyes, their computers working as one brain to pick apart the enemy formation. It was a hive mind forged from light and steel, turning a fleet of individual ships into a single, deadly organism. At timestamp 512, it finally dawned on Admiral Kree that he wasn't fighting disorganized primitives. He was facing an army that had been waiting for this exact fight for generations. Every weapon they fired was tailor-made to dismantle Voratheian tech. Every move they made exploited a weakness in Imperial strategy he thought no one knew. "All ships, get us out of here!" Kree's voice, once booming with confidence, was now thin and desperate. "Fall back to Mars and prep the hyperspace drives." His fleet scrambled to obey. Voratheian ships turned tail, their engines flaring as they bolted. But a hyperspace jump isn't instant. The ship's computers need a full 30 seconds to calculate a safe path. 30 seconds to chart a course that wouldn't smash them into a star. 30 seconds where they had to fly straight and steady for the jump to even engage. And the humans knew it. It was right there in the technical specs the Voratheians had boasted about in their public broadcasts, bragging about their ability to reposition their fleet so quickly. The humans hadn't just read the manual. They'd built their entire battle plan around that tiny 30-second window of vulnerability. The moment a Voratheian ship lined up for a jump, human missiles screamed toward it. Every vessel trying to escape became the #1 target. Kinetic slugs, nuclear warheads, and focused laser beams slammed into ships when they were most helpless, turning them into fireballs or sending them tumbling into the void with their escape drives shattered. "We can't get out, and we can't fight!" the tactical officer yelled, his voice cracking. "Sir, they're picking off every ship that tries to jump. We've lost 43 vessels in the last minute alone." Kree could only stare at the tactical map as the red icons representing his ships winked out of existence, one after another. This was supposed to be an easy conquest, a simple show of the Empire's might. Instead, it was turning into an absolute slaughter. At timestamp 833, the Vorathian cruiser Infinite Victory finally got a win, blasting a human frigate that had strayed too close. The cruiser's captain, Threxus, let a small smile cross his face. At last, a kill. At last, proof they could still hit back. That feeling of satisfaction lasted for exactly 4 seconds. 6 human destroyers that had been pretending to run away suddenly spun around and charged. They had used their own frigate as bait, a trick that had already worked more than once. The humans just didn't care about their individual ships the way the Vorathians did. They treated them like bullets in a gun, completely expendable if it meant taking down a bigger enemy target. It was a cold, brutal math that horrified the Vorathians, who prized military honor and the glory of a single ship. The destroyers opened up at point-blank range. The Infinite Victory and its 3 escorts were hammered from all sides at once. Their shields buckled, armor boiled away, and their reactors went critical. In the span of 40 seconds, 4 Vorathian warships vanished, their flaming wreckage joining the growing junkyard that was making the space around Earth a death trap. All across the galaxy, other species watching the broadcast were starting to get it. This wasn't just a battle, it was a message. Humanity was showing everyone that having the best technology means nothing if you don't have the guts to use it right. The Vorathians had bigger ships and better guns, but the humans had a better plan, better training, and were willing to sacrifice anything and everything to win. At timestamp 1109, Admiral Kree's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, took a direct hit to its bridge. A kinetic slug fired from a human battleship slammed into the front of the dreadnought, right where human intelligence knew the command center would be. The projectile, traveling at a fraction of the speed of light, tore through 30 meters of reinforced armor before its tiny nuclear warhead detonated deep inside the command deck. Kree had just a single second to realize what was happening. He saw the ceiling above him twist and shatter. He saw his officers get thrown across the room like dolls. He saw fire burst from the walls and the main view screen crack open, sucking the very air from his lungs. His last words, broadcast over every Vorathian channel for the entire galaxy to hear, were a choked scream of pure disbelief and fury. "How, you primitives!" Then, the Eternal Dominion's reactor core went critical. The flagship that had crushed 9 rebellions, the ship that had destroyed countless enemies, the vessel they called Unsinkable, broke apart into 3 massive pieces and dozens of smaller ones. Admiral Kree and his crew of 12,000 were gone in an instant. The loss of the flagship sent the rest of the Vorathian fleet into total chaos. With no one giving orders, every captain was on their own. Some tried to fight back, some made a run for it, and some just gave up, broadcasting desperate pleas for mercy. The humans answered with silence and weapons fire. This was never a battle for territory or resources. This was extermination. Every last Vorathian ship was a target, and the human fleet wasn't going to stop until every single target was gone. There would be no prisoners taken, no survivors to carry the story back to the Empire, and no witnesses except for the horrified species watching from light years away. At timestamp 1322, a small Vorathian scout ship, the Swift Messenger, finally broke through the chaos. Its captain was a young officer named Keyleth, and he was flying the fastest ship in the fleet. Scout ships were built for speed, not a fair fight. Their job was to outrun danger and report back. Keyleth pushed his engines far past the safety limits, streaking toward the outer solar system, trying to get just far enough away from the sun to make a clean hyperspace jump. He was so close. He was going to make it. The human ships were too busy with other targets, too far away to catch him. Just a few more minutes and he'd be gone. He would escape. He would be the one to warn the Empire that humanity was nothing like they'd thought, that this whole invasion had been a trap, and that everything they knew about these primitives was dead wrong. And then, a single human ship appeared on his sensors, accelerating from behind Saturn's moons. The speed was just impossible. No ship could move that fast without turning its own crew into jelly from the G-forces. It was pulling maneuvers that would snap bones and rupture organs. In that one terrifying moment, Keyleth understood. The ship chasing him didn't have a crew. It was a drone, controlled by a computer, capable of doing things no living pilot could ever survive. And it was faster than him. The drone caught up to the Swift Messenger at timestamp 1358. It didn't fire a single missile or laser. It just rammed the scout ship at an insane speed, its reinforced nose plowing straight through the engines. Both ships exploded in a silent flash of light, adding 2 more smudges to the cosmic junkyard. But just before the impact, Keyleth had managed to send one last desperate message. It was a compressed burst of data shot out on an emergency channel, a warning that would take years to crawl its way back to Vorathian space, but it would get there eventually. The message was short and simple. Earth is not what we thought. They were ready. They were waiting for us. The entire fleet is gone. For the love of the Empire, do not come here. Do not come here. At timestamp 1400, the very last Vorathian ship in the system, a crippled frigate hiding behind Mars, was found by a sensor sweep and obliterated by a volley of missiles. Its captain never even had a chance to say, "We surrender." Human computers had simply calculated that the damaged ship might eventually repair its drive and escape, so it was marked for immediate destruction. And just like that, the battle was over. 4 hours earlier, 847 Vorathian warships had entered the solar system. Now, not a single one was left. The human fleet had lost 63 ships, every single one sacrificed intentionally to take out multiple enemy vessels. The final score was staggering, a kill ratio of over 13-1. In the Galactic Council chamber, the delegates from 1,000 worlds sat in stunned, absolute silence. The screens that had shown the brutal battle now showed only floating fields of wreckage, with the victorious human fleet assembling quietly in Earth's orbit. The Vorathian delegate just sat there, frozen in his chair, his red eyes completely vacant with shock. Imagine being the top dog, the undisputed champion of the galaxy for 3 centuries, only to have your entire legacy wiped out in minutes. Finally, another delegate, a Thaxian, broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. The Vorathian Empire. They've ruled for 300 years. They've conquered 17 civilizations and never once lost a battle. And now, a species we all thought were basically cavemen just annihilated their entire fleet in 14 minutes. The Draxian delegate nearby turned, his face grim. "You're wrong," he said. "This wasn't 14 minutes. This started 40 years ago, the moment the humans first picked up our broadcasts. They've been getting ready for this day for 4 decades. They built their arsenal, they drilled their soldiers, and they transformed their entire solar system into an impenetrable fortress. And then they just waited. They waited for the galaxy to write them off as harmless. They waited for the perfect moment to pull back the curtain and show everyone who they truly were. Suddenly, a new message blasted through the comms, overriding everything else. It was sent on every frequency, translated into every language known to the Galactic Council. On every screen, the face of a human woman appeared. She called herself Representative Chen, and her message was as simple as it was terrifying. "Earth is closed," she announced. "Any ship that enters our territory will be destroyed. No questions asked. We don't want anything from you. We won't take anything from you. Stay out of our space and you'll never hear from us again. But if you come looking for trouble, you will end up just like the Vorathians. This is the one and only warning you will get." The transmission cut out, leaving the entire galaxy in stunned silence, forced to accept a terrifying new truth. Humanity had just introduced itself to the cosmos, and they did it with a tidal wave of violence. The Galactic Council chamber was packed. It had never been this crowded. Every species had sent their diplomats, and most brought their top military brass along too. They all had one question: what just happened? And the unspoken fear: are we next? These humans had just dismantled the most powerful military in the known universe in less than 15 minutes. What else were they capable of? What other secrets were they hiding? High Chancellor Vexith stood before the assembly, but the commanding presence he once had was gone. He didn't look confident anymore. He looked scared. The myth of the Vorathaean Empire's invincibility had been shattered, and every single person in that room knew it. "The Council recognizes the human delegation," Vexith said, his booming voice now barely a murmur. "We called this meeting to get some answers about what happened in the Sol system. Representative Chen, your people have a lot of explaining to do." In the middle of the chamber, a hologram flickered to life, showing Representative Chen. She stood there, life-sized, in a plain dark blue uniform without a single medal or award on it. She was a smaller woman, with short cropped hair and an expression that was completely unreadable. She had the look of someone who didn't need to impress anyone, because she already held all the cards. "High Chancellor," Chen began, her voice steady and professional. "You say we have a lot to explain. I don't agree. We don't owe you any explanations, but just so we can avoid any future misunderstandings, I'll give you one." The Thaxian counselor, choosing his words with extreme care, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Representative Chen, our reports showed that your species was decades, maybe centuries, away from faster-than-light travel. You had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, no gravity manipulation. How on earth did you defeat a Vorathaean fleet that had all of that and more?" Chen offered a small, cold smile. "Counselor," she said, "your question gets to the heart of the big mistake everyone made about Earth. You looked at our technology and thought you understood us. You saw us using chemical rockets and atomic bombs and labeled us as primitive. You were dead wrong." She brought up a display, a timeline for everyone to see. 40 years ago, our radio telescopes picked up signals from outside our solar system, specifically Vorathaean military chatter. We heard about your fleet movements, your battle plans, your celebrations after conquering other worlds. We learned two things that day. First, that we weren't alone. And second, that the galaxy was a very dangerous neighborhood, run by a superpower that crushed species like ours without a second thought. The delegates started shifting in their seats. Many of them had been in this very room when the Council rubber-stamped those Vorathaean conquests. They'd watched the victory broadcasts and had done absolutely nothing. Chen went on. "The governments of Earth made a decision. For the first time in our history, every single nation, all our warring factions agreed on one simple thing. We would not be next on the chopping block. We would prepare. We would be ready for the day the Vorathaeans came for us, because we knew, sooner or later, they would come." "You spent 40 years getting ready for this?" a Draxian military commander asked, stunned. "How did you keep a secret that massive for that long?" "We went dark," Chen said simply. "We shut down all deep space broadcasts. No more friendly messages into the void. To the rest of you, it looked like we were exactly what you thought. A backward civilization, fumbling around with rockets in our own backyard. But you couldn't see what we were really building." The display changed, showing breathtaking images of huge construction projects hidden in asteroid fields on the far side of Earth's moon, tucked away in the rings of Saturn. "We funneled 15% of our entire planet's GDP into a secret military program. Every country pitched in. We built shipyards where your scanners would never find them. We mined asteroids and moons for resources. We trained entire generations of soldiers and engineers. All of it was done in total secrecy, designed from the ground up to be invisible to you." "But the technology," Vexith interrupted, desperate. "Your weapons. They shouldn't have even scratched our shields. Kinetic weapons are ancient. Nuclear bombs are clumsy. How did they get through?" Chen turned her gaze to the Vorathaean delegate. Because we studied you, High Chancellor, for 40 years. We listened to every broadcast. We watched every battle recording. We analyzed every scrap of data you so carelessly shared with the galaxy. Your fleet layouts, your shield frequencies, your armor plating specs, your battle tactics. You published all of it, shouting it from the rooftops to prove how strong you were. She let the words hang in the air. You gave us the blueprint for your own destruction, and then you acted surprised when we used it. Your shields are made to stop energy blasts. They do almost nothing against a solid chunk of metal moving at relativistic speed. Your armor can take a plasma hit, but it shatters like glass from a kinetic impact. Your tactics are all about rigid formations in a central command, so we use swarms of drones and unpredictable attack vectors. We didn't try to match your tech. We built the perfect counter to it. The Thaxian counselor spoke up again, his voice trembling now. You said you used kinetic weapons to get a projectile moving at 30% of the speed of light. The energy required is astronomical. How did you manage that without advanced shielding to protect your own ships? We didn't need shields like yours, Chen replied. We used ablative armor. It's cheap to make and just effective enough. When your plasma shots hit our ships, the outer layers just boiled off, protecting the hull underneath. It's a simple fix, but it worked. A lot of our technology is simple, Counselor. That's why it's so strong. It's reliable, easy to mass produce, and doesn't rely on the rare materials your fancy systems need. The display changed again, showing the designs for human warships. Our ships are built to be tough and redundant. If one system goes down, there are 3 more to back it up. If a part breaks, you can swap it out in minutes. They aren't pretty or elegant like your ships, but they get the job done. And we built hundreds and hundreds of them while you weren't looking. A wave of understanding washed over the chamber. An entire species, united by a common threat, had turned their whole world into a war machine, and nobody in the galaxy had a clue. It was unbelievable. A delegate from a small species called the Yarks asked a question, his voice shaking. Representative Chen, your tactics were savage. You used your own ships as bait. You intentionally sacrificed your crews to take down Vorathaean dreadnoughts. You offered no quarter. You took no prisoners. Is this just how your species makes war? Chen's expression remained a flat, calm mask. Yes, she said. When we fight to win. We don't care about honor or glory. We fight to live another day. Every single person who flew into that battle knew they might not make it back. They signed up anyway because they knew what was on the line. If the Vorathaeans had won, Earth would be a slave colony. Our people would have spent generations in servitude. We chose to die on our feet rather than live on our knees. She scanned the room, her eyes locking with delegates from species that had bent the knee to the Empire. I know some of you look at us and see monsters, but think about this. We gave Admiral Kreth a chance to leave. We warned him to stay away from our home. He marched forward anyway, certain of his own might. He saw us as primitives, expecting we'd crumble in fear and surrender. He was dead wrong, and his fleet paid the ultimate price for that arrogance. The Draxian observer leaned in, his voice a low hum. But your stealth technology, how did you possibly conceal hundreds of ships from Vorathaean sensors? Chen gave a simple answer. Basic thermodynamics. We engineered our ships to run cold with minimal emissions, relying solely on passive sensors until the moment we chose to fight. We tucked our vessels into places your scanners would only ever give a passing glance. The asteroid belt, the rings of Saturn, even the dark side of our own moon. We were hiding in plain sight, masquerading as space junk and dead satellites. You were scanning for advanced warships with blazing sensors and powered-up weapons, she continued, a grim smile touching her lips. You weren't searching for quiet, patient hunters, waiting for the one perfect moment to pounce. You believed technology was the only thing that mattered, but we had patience, strategy, and discipline on our side. We spent 40 years just watching and learning. We became the galaxy's foremost experts on Vorathaean military strategy without ever firing a shot. By the time the battle started, we knew your every move before you even made it. High Chancellor Vexith's crimson eyes flared with a fury he could barely suppress. You speak as if this was self-defense, but you annihilated an entire fleet. 12,000 Varathian soldiers lost their lives in that fight, he snarled. Their only transgression was obeying orders to expand the empire. Chen swiveled to face him directly, her voice turning to ice. Their transgression was attempting to conquer my home. High Chancellor, they arrived at Earth with 800 warships and an ultimatum: submission or annihilation. They swore to burn our cities to ash if we dared to resist. What exactly did you expect us to do? Throw a parade? Thank them for the privilege of becoming slaves to your empire? A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Vexith was speechless. Chen pressed on, her voice rising with tightly leashed anger. And let's be clear about something else. For 40 years, we monitored the Galactic Council broadcasts. We listened as representatives from 47 different species debated the Vorathian conquests. We heard you discuss subjugation operations. We watched you vote to formally absorb conquered worlds into the Empire. Not once did we hear a single species object. Not one time did we hear anyone even suggest that the Vorathians should be stopped. Her gaze swept across the chamber, and delegate after delegate looked away, unable to meet her eyes. You all knew what the Empire was. You all stood by and watched as they devoured species after species, and you did absolutely nothing. You were too scared, too weak, or just too comfortable with how things were to stand up. So don't you dare stand there and lecture me about the lives we were forced to take to defend our own freedom. You had 40 years to create something better than the Vorathian Empire. You chose to live on your knees instead. The Thaxian counselor spoke, his voice barely a whisper. You are not wrong, Representative Chen. We should have done more. We should have fought back. But the Vorathian Empire, it was just too powerful. No single species could have faced them alone. Then you should have stood together, Chen shot back, her tone sharp as glass. 47 species are represented on this council, billions of lives spread across thousands of worlds. If you had united against the Vorathians 3 centuries ago, the Empire never would have become the monster it was. But you didn't. You chose a peace bought with submission over a freedom worth fighting for. She let the weight of her accusation hang in the silent air before her voice softened. Earth will not repeat that mistake. We are not joining your council. We will not get involved in your politics. We will never again depend on others for our own survival. We are officially claiming our solar system and a 50 light-year exclusion zone around it. Any ship that crosses into that zone without our express permission will be destroyed. There will be no exceptions. There will be no second chances. 50 light-years, Vexith sputtered. That territory encompasses 17 star systems. You can't possibly defend a space that vast. A genuine, amused smile finally broke across Chen's face. Can't we, High Chancellor? You also thought we couldn't defend our own little solar system. You thought 800 warships would be more than enough to bring us to heel. How did that work out for you? She reactivated the display, showing a star map centered on Earth. Vast red zones marked the new exclusion area. For 40 years, you looked at our solar system and saw nothing but primitive chemical rockets. You never once spotted our warship construction yards. You never found our hidden defense platforms. You never guessed we were preparing for total war. What on earth makes you think you know what we've been building in the star systems next door? A cold wave of dread washed over the chamber. If the humans had secretly built up a war machine for 40 years in their own backyard, what could they have constructed in the surrounding systems? How far did their preparations truly reach? We have placed automated defense platforms all throughout the exclusion zone, Chen stated calmly. They have been sitting there, silent, for the last 20 years. You never found them because you weren't even looking for them. These platforms are programmed with one simple directive: destroy any unauthorized vessel. They do not negotiate. They do not give warnings. They just eliminate threats. She switched off the display and faced the silent delegates. Humanity is officially withdrawing from galactic affairs. We do not want your trade. We do not want your alliances. We do not want your politics. All we ask is to be left alone. Stay out of our space and you will never have to deal with us again. Enter our territory and you will share the same fate as the Vorathians. What if we need help? A small voice piped up. It was the delegate from Plinix, a species conquered by the Vorathians 200 years ago. What if other empires rise to take their place now that they're weakened? Will you come to our aid? Chen looked at the Plinix delegate, a flicker of what might have been sympathy in her eyes. No. Earth's policy is strict isolation and self-defense. We will not be drawn into galactic wars. We will not be your saviors. You must save yourselves. Build your own defenses. Forge your own alliances. Create the peaceful galaxy you always claimed you wanted, but do it without us. She paused, adding softly, I'm truly sorry, but humanity has learned an unforgiving lesson. We cannot trust other species to have our backs. We cannot rely on councils or treaties. The only true security is the strength you build for yourself. That is why Earth is closed. The holographic image of Chen began to flicker and fade. Just before she vanished, she delivered one last message. This is the first and only official communication humanity will have with this Galactic Council. Do not try to contact us. Do not send your ambassadors or your trade ships, and do not test the borders of our exclusion zone. We have said everything that needs to be said. Remember what became of the Vorathian 7th Fleet, and stay away. The projection winked out, plunging the council chamber into a stunned, deafening silence. 6 months had passed since the 14-minute war, and the galaxy had been turned upside down in ways no one could have imagined. The Vorathian Empire, the undisputed superpower in known space for 3 centuries, was collapsing. Without its military might to enforce its rule, without the sheer terror that kept its conquered worlds in line, the empire shattered into chaos. The very first world to rise up was Draxus. The Draxian people had been subjugated for 140 years, their warrior culture brutally suppressed by Vorathian occupation forces. The moment news of the 7th Fleet's annihilation reached Draxus, the planetary government declared its independence within hours. Vorathian officials were peacefully escorted off-world, and the Draxians immediately began constructing their own defense fleet, using starship designs they had secretly guarded since before their conquest. Other worlds followed in a torrent. Thaxia, Plen, Yellen, a dozen other species declared their freedom. Some of these transitions were bloodless, others turned violent as local Vorathian garrisons desperately tried and failed to cling to power. The Empire scrambled to respond, dispatching fleets to reclaim its rebellious territories, but its forces were stretched impossibly thin. With the 7th Fleet gone and its remaining military assets tied up defending the core worlds, the Vorathians couldn't possibly stamp out so many uprisings at once. Within 3 months, the Vorathian Empire had lost half of its territory. The worlds that remained fractured into warring factions, each claiming to be the Empire's true successor. Civil war erupted as ambitious Vorathian commanders turned on each other, fighting for the scraps of their fallen dominion. The species that had conquered 17 civilizations was now tearing itself apart from the inside. The Galactic Council, already a laughingstock for its failure to see the human threat coming, became utterly irrelevant almost overnight. Member species simply stopped showing up for sessions. The Council Station, once the shining symbol of galactic cooperation, became a ghost town. The few representatives who bothered to attend wasted their time pointing fingers and assigning blame instead of addressing the wildfire of chaos spreading across the galaxy. The Thaxian counselor, one of the few who still came to the sessions, stood before the nearly vacant chamber and spoke to the empty seats. We failed. Of all us, we let the Vorathians build an empire on a foundation of fear and conquest. We told ourselves it brought stability. We told ourselves it was peace. But it was a fragile peace, held together only by the threat of violence. And the moment someone finally stood up to that violence and won, the entire rotten structure came crashing down. In the back of the chamber, the Draxian military observer nodded grimly. The galaxy is in an arms race now. Every species that can is building warships. Everyone is studying the human strategy, desperate to figure out how they crush the Vorathians so completely. Everyone is terrified they'll be the next target on someone else's list. And can you blame them? The Thaxian replied. The humans taught us that technological dominance is worthless without the will and the strategy to use it. They also taught us that self-reliance and isolation are far more dependable than any treaty or council. After Earth taught the galaxy a lesson written in fire and steel, a chilling silence fell. How could anyone trust the Council again? How could they have missed the sleeping giant in their midst? The Draxian ambassador had no answer. As the rest of the galaxy spiraled into fear and infighting, the human exclusion zone was dead quiet. No ships dared to cross the line. No messages escaped their space. Far-off sensors picked up strange activity near Earth's sun, but from that distance, it was impossible to tell what humanity was building. Enormous structures bloomed in Jupiter's orbit. Bizarre energy readings pulsed from Saturn. Ships zipped between the planets of their solar system, but not one of them ever peeked beyond the 50-light-year border they had drawn in the stars. The whispers started. Were the humans building armadas of colony ships to escape a dying galaxy? Were they creating planet-killer weapons to hold everyone hostage? Or were they inventing something new, something that would make their last victory look like a child's tantrum? The scariest part was that nobody knew, and no one was brave enough to go look. A small survey ship from the Planth species made that fatal mistake. Hoping to find new worlds to settle, they drifted into the exclusion zone. They were 51 light-years from Earth when they crossed the line. There was no hail, no warning shot, just a flicker of movement in the dark as hidden defense platforms came to life and tore their ship apart with railgun slugs. All 37 souls on board were gone in an instant. The message couldn't have been clearer. Earth wasn't bluffing. The exclusion zone was absolute. On Vexith, a shattered piece of the old Vathayan Empire, the few military leaders left gathered in a panic. They had lost all contact with 17 of their garrison fleets. Their economy was in freefall as planets they once ruled refused to pay tribute. A brutal civil war was chewing through what little they had left. But what truly terrified them was the thought of humanity looking their way. "What's to stop them from attacking us?" one commander asked, his voice shaking. "What if they see how weak we are and just finish the job?" "They won't," Admiral Thraxus sighed. He was one of the only high-ranking officers to survive the political fallout after the 7th Fleet was annihilated. "The humans told us exactly what they want, to be left alone. As long as we stay out of their backyard, they have no reason to come after us." "But what if someone else does?" another commander shot back. "What if the Draxians want payback for what we did to them? Will the humans step in to help us then?" Thraxus let out a bitter laugh. "Help us? Were you not listening to Representative Chen's broadcast? She made it plain that Earth will not get involved in galactic squabbles. We are completely on our own. We dug this hole for ourselves by underestimating them, and now we have to lie in it." He pulled up a star chart, a massive red sphere marking the space now controlled by humanity. That 50-light-year bubble was a declaration of independence from the entire galaxy. "The humans didn't just claim territory," Thraxus said grimly. "They proved that you don't need treaties or alliances to be safe. They showed everyone that you can go it alone." And now, every other species was scrambling to do the same. In the deep black, far from any prying eyes, a secret meeting was underway. 7 different species had sent delegates to a neutral ship, a meeting their own governments didn't even know about. They were calling themselves the Liberation Coalition, and they were planning a revolution. The Draxian delegate spoke first. "We all know why we're here. The Varathian Empire is a ghost, the Galactic Council is a joke, and humanity has shown us that the only real safety comes from being strong enough to protect yourself. But we can't all be Earth. We don't have 40 years to get ready. We don't have their resources, and we definitely don't have their unity." "So we work together," the Thaxian representative countered. "We pool our resources, share our tech, and build a defensive alliance so strong that no one will ever think of starting a new empire." "But what about the humans?" the Plen delegate interrupted. "What if they see a new alliance as a threat? What if they think we're a danger to them?" "Then we prove we're not," the Draxian said. "We make it crystal clear that we respect their space. No flybys, no spy probes, nothing. Our actions will show them that we want exactly what they want, peace, and the right to control our own destiny." In the months that followed, the Liberation Coalition quietly grew. More species signed on, sharing military blueprints and coordinating their factories. They even started using human tactics. building smaller automated defense posts and focusing on simple, reliable systems instead of fancy, complicated tech. They analyzed the Battle of the Sol system like a sacred text, trying to squeeze every last drop of wisdom from humanity's impossible victory. But they did something humanity never had. They trusted each other. They shared everything openly, building an alliance on cooperation, not conquest. They were creating what the Galactic Council had only ever pretended to be, a partnership of equals dedicated to mutual defense. Back on Earth, in the Unified Defense Command Center, Representative Chen watched reports flow in from the edge of their space. "The galaxy is changing," her intelligence chief said. "The Vorathian Empire is gone for good. A bunch of successor states are tearing each other apart over the scraps, and at least 15 species have formed their own defensive pacts. The biggest one calls itself the Liberation Coalition. It looks like they're borrowing a few pages from our playbook." "Good," Chen said without looking away from the screen. "Let them learn to stand on their own 2 feet. Let them protect themselves. Isn't that what we wanted? A galaxy of free peoples, not slaves to an empire." "But what if one of these alliances gets strong enough to challenge us?" a military advisor chimed in. "What if they manage to unite the galaxy against Earth?" Chen just smiled and brought up a new display. It showed the explosive growth of human industry across the entire solar system, massive cities in orbit, asteroid mining colonies, fusion plants on the moons of Jupiter, and shipyards that were churning out the next generation of warships and defense platforms. "Let them try," she said, her voice calm as ice. "We took out the Vathayan 7th Fleet in 14 minutes, and that was with tech we designed 40 years ago. Do you honestly think we've just been sitting on our hands for the past 6 months? Do you think we stopped innovating?" She zoomed the display out to the farthest reaches of the solar system, revealing ship designs with new propulsion drives and weapons that made the old ones look like toys. "The Vorathayans made one critical mistake," Chen explained. "They thought the best technology would win the war. But wars are won by who prepares better, who fights smarter, and who simply refuses to lose. We spent 40 years getting ready for the Vorathayans. We've spent the last 6 months getting ready for whatever comes next." A young officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with all due respect, some are saying we might be preparing for the wrong future. The galaxy isn't just chaos. New alliances are forming, better systems. Maybe we should rethink our isolation. We could help guide them." Chen turned to the young officer, and her expression softened. "I understand that feeling, I truly do. But our policy is in place for a very good reason. The second we get involved in galactic politics, we paint a target on our own backs. Everyone will either want to hide behind us or tear us down. We'd be dragged into endless conflicts, forced to take sides, to bleed for other people's problems." She walked to the observation window, gazing at the blue and green marble of Earth below. "Our own people spent centuries killing each other over flags, gods, and dirt. We almost burned this world to a crisp with our own weapons. It took an alien threat to finally make us stand together as one. That unity is the most precious thing we have, and it's fragile. We can't risk shattering it by getting tangled in the galaxy's wars." "So we just watch?" the officer asked quietly. "We watch as they maybe fall under the boot of another empire, and we do nothing?" "We do more than nothing," Chen corrected him gently. "We protect ourselves. We hold on to our strength and our freedom. We are living proof that a species can survive in this hostile galaxy by relying on itself. We are leading, not by telling them what to do, but by showing them what is possible. You don't need an empire to be safe. You just need the will to build your own walls and the strength to defend them." She leaned back, watching the data stream across the main screen. "Take a look at this," she said, her voice calm. Out on the edge of their self-imposed border, something incredible was happening. 3 alliances had popped up in the last month, cobbled together from the shattered remnants of the Vorathayan Empire. Species that had been enemies for generations were now sharing tech, building defense grids, and learning to stand on their own. "It's working," she whispered. "They're finally learning to fend for themselves." Her intelligence chief wasn't so sure. But for how long? Alliances like these are fragile. What happens when old rivalries flare up over a moon or a mining asteroid? Chen gave a slight shrug. Then they'll handle it. That's not our fight anymore. Earth has carved out what it needs. The rest is up to them. We control 17 star systems now, she reminded them, gesturing to the holographic map. That's more than enough room for us to grow for centuries. We have the resources, the territory, and the firepower to stay independent. That's all that matters. She could see the doubt etched on some of their faces. I know what you're thinking, that we're being selfish, but imagine the alternative. If we get tangled up in galactic politics, how long until we're dragged into someone else's war? How long until they see our fleet not as a shield for our own people, but as a sword to be used for their own agendas? Our ancestors were clear about this, she went on. We fight for our survival, not to build an empire. We protect what is ours, and ours alone. By sticking to that one simple rule, they would never become the monsters they had just defeated. They would never be another galactic power crushing others for the sake of a false peace. As the weeks rolled into months, the galaxy began to heal itself without any help from Earth. The scrappy new Liberation Coalition grew to include 23 species, becoming a real force to be reckoned with. The old Varathaean warlords kept tearing each other apart, bleeding themselves dry. New trade lanes buzzed with activity, connecting worlds that had never been allowed to speak to each other before. And through it all, Earth remained silent, a ghost in the galactic machine. No ships went in, and no messages came out. The humans had simply vanished from the stage, leaving everyone to wonder what they were plotting behind their wall of silence. Some looked at Earth and saw a wasted opportunity. With human strategy and strength, a new, better galaxy could have been built from the ashes. Others saw their isolation as the ultimate act of wisdom. By staying out of the game, the humans could never be corrupted by it. But on one thing, everyone agreed. The galaxy was never going to be the same. The fall of the Varathaean Empire proved that no one was invincible. Earth's impossible victory showed that sheer will and brilliant strategy could beat superior technology every single time. And humanity's silent retreat proved you didn't have to play the great game to survive. In the end, Earth got everything it ever wanted. Safety guaranteed by its own strength, and peace guaranteed by a very clear message. Messing with them was a fatal mistake. The galaxy learned to give that silent sphere of space a very wide berth. And so, they learned to just stay away. Back in the Unified Defense Command Center, Representative Chen allowed herself a tiny, satisfied smile as she read the latest reports. The plan had worked perfectly. Earth was secure, humanity was free. The rest of the galaxy, for better or for worse, was on its own. "Ma'am," an aide said, approaching her console, "it's the Liberation Coalition again. Another request for diplomatic talks. They're asking if we might consider sharing some defensive tech." Chen didn't even hesitate. "Send the standard reply. Our position is unchanged. We appreciate that they respect our borders, but we are not interested in treaties or technology trades." "Tell them to keep innovating," she added. "They've come this far without us." The aide nodded and walked off. Chen turned back to her screen, watching the symbols of a civilization rebuilding, growing, and fortifying itself in the quiet safety they had won. Earth was closed for business, and it would stay that way forever if it had to. Because humanity had learned the most brutal lesson the galaxy had to offer. In the end, you can only count on yourself. Alliances break, treaties become worthless. The only thing that lasts is the strength you build with your own two hands. The Varathaean Empire, a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries, had been shattered in 14 minutes. 14, the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. And the galaxy would never forget that lesson. They would remember that Earth gave them one warning, and only one: stay away. And the galaxy, having finally learned a little wisdom, did exactly that.